Hello friends, how are you? I'm Mari Theriger and today I'm going to talk about the rise of the witch. This is the season of the witch until at least Yule. The dark veil will envelop the world in mystery and dreams that report back to primordial memories. So today I'm going to talk about the origins of the concept of the witch and its development over the course of time and the influence of mythologies, religions and persecution. I do hope you enjoy this October video. In our modern world, since the adoption of monotheistic religious perceptions that have quickly developed into political organizations, much of the old ways have been either forgotten or twisted in such a way that at some point we willingly forsaken our roots when lies became the universal truth. Even in neo-paganisms, much of this attitude towards the religious was still brought into the attempts to recreate ancient spiritualities. We have often made and still make the mistake of bringing modern ways of thinking into spiritualities that in the past the mindset of the people who practiced such spiritualities was absolutely completely different from ours. In the ancient world, magic was part of the everyday lives of our ancestors. Even to this day, in the archaeological record, it's still quite hard to make a clear separation between magic and religion. Maybe we archaeologists are trying too hard to find this separation that simply did not exist in the past. Bringing our modern perceptions of the spiritual, the religious and the supernatural into the past just doesn't work well when making interpretations of what we find of ancient cultures. Magic was without a doubt part of the religious life. There was no religion without magical performances and rituals. But as cultures grew and new religions emerged, witchcraft and the people who practiced it became twisted notions that cause fear and doubt, demonized in such a way that in our ignorance we were even capable of causing harm to those we once called loved ones. We have pointed fingers and labeled someone a witch, and we have sealed that person's fate forever. We condemned such people to a horrible end. Once being a witch was something to be praised and revered. People sought a witch for all sorts of things, for healing, divination, wisdom, to solve problems, to have hope, even to bring life into this world and death, and also for comfort. Until someone decided it was wrong. Almost every culture across the modern world recognizes the concept of a witch, certainly with a few variations here and there, but all in all, we have come to a point that a witch represents something dark and sinister, something to be feared. And as our societies became more detached from what was once magical and pure, the figure of the witch became even more twisted. And we have fervently tried to bury the sensitivity required to be in contact with the supernatural in exchange for a life within the confinements of a religious structure and praying to an entity so unfamiliar and foreigner to us. To man, it wasn't easy to bury our sensitive side, but we did it. We went from wild creatures of nature to tame beasts in a cage. We, men, are good now in bearing emotions, and the slightest hint of something more sensitive, we just crush it and move on with our lives. And then we wonder why we are so alone and the divine entities of the world and the cosmos don't speak to us. But luckily for men, women still retain their sensitive side, even though we have also tried to bury their sensitiveness. And because we couldn't entirely do it, the sensitiveness women were able to maintain or retain, we have called it witchcraft. And witchcraft became known as the dark side of femininity. Both men and women were once sensitive to the natural world and all that surrounds us. But certain religious notions prevented us from being humans, from being in tune with life itself. Witchcraft became solely a dark side of women, so men couldn't possibly practice witchcraft, or they were labeled effeminate and condemned. Women couldn't practice witchcraft either, because it was an affront towards the good conduct and well-tamed behavior of men. It is quite sad indeed to so willingly accepting religions that deny sensitivity in all of us, deny the humanity in us. But in all truth, the witch is a woman and a man who cannot be controlled by what religious organizations dictate, and the shallow illusions of right and wrong imposed by a society that tries to turn us all into well-behaved followers seeking the same delusional fantasy of salvation. But of course, it wasn't always like this. The notions of witches and witchcraft have been tempered over centuries of mythology, religions, and persecution. The earliest versions of witches couldn't be more different from the sinister image we have rooted in our minds for far too long. Witches were healers and bastions of society. In many ancient societies, female deities were worshipped, and the holiest of rituals surrounding them were performed by women trained for that same purpose. Even male gods practiced witchcraft and bestowed their powers to both men and women. Magic was everywhere. Witchcraft was everywhere. Witches were once known as wise women and were seen as crucial to the societies they lived in. They would stand beside chieftains, kings, armies would come to them for sacred rituals, and people even relied on them to deliver babies. The witch was adored and revered in ancient societies, so how on earth the figure of the witch was transformed into the personification of evil and misfortune we recognize today? The figure of the witch, or rather the wise woman, started to lose its importance, at least in the old European continent, precisely with the Indo-Europeans. What I'm going to say next will certainly bother, thank the gods, even enrage many neo-pagans who for some reason only choose to cling on the historical facts that best suits them. So, here's something, again, they don't teach you at fancy law school. When Indo-Europeans expanded westwards their male-dominated culture, which focused on the power of warriors, war, and fierce male sky gods, they overtook the gentler and passive female deities that had previously ruled all over Europe. There are plenty of evidences that with the coming of the Indo-Europeans, the perceptions of magic and the females who practiced it, even males, changes upon the development of male-dominated societies and religions. You see, many neo-pagans love to talk about Indo-Europeans as the true ancestors of the modern Europeans, but maybe aren't you forgetting that there were actual people in the old continent before Indo-Europeans? Those with the R1b mutation that happened around 20,000 years BC and spread it all over Europe, from the west into the east and north. Aren't those, the R1b haplogroup, the actual ancestors of Europeans? The people of the West Atlantic that were here before Indo-Europeans invaded from the east? Are we just going to pretend that Europe was empty before Indo-Europeans? The truth is, and that as it is seen in the archaeological record, before Indo-Europeans, most European natives had matriarchal societies, and others that didn't have something concrete that tells us they were in a matriarchal society, at least the great majority of them, of their gods, were female. We have plenty of evidences of Earth Mother goddesses. The sun was female, the feminine spirit of animals that were the embodiment of feminine fertility powers. The sun was the embodiment of the feminine power that sustained life. Mostly in prehistoric Europe, the sun was regarded as female, especially by tribal communities whose animistic concepts of the spiritual were very firm and well preserved. We can clearly see that the sun worship of the ancient world of prehistoric times, the sun's feminine gender is entwined with the veneration of the earth goddess as a symbol of divine source. With the rise of the Indo-European sky gods and the religious notions around the warrior cult and the male sky gods of war, the male gender enters in the sun worship alongside with the female sun when Indo-Europeans finally come into Europe and come in contact with the natives of Europe. It's curious because we have indications in many myths that when Indo-European religious beliefs in sky deities come in contact with various ancient European indigenous solar goddesses, there is a marriage between sky gods and sky goddesses. So, this is the moment when the female figure starts to be kept aside from the religious life, or in the greatest majority, were kept in just specific cults linked to older female goddesses, while the warrior sky gods started to dominate the societies. The old native worshipping of female goddesses of Europe wasn't wiped out with Indo-Europeans, but it was incorporated, but it was also indeed overshadowed by the new male sky gods. Indo-European sky gods from the East. You know which other religions later on in history also came from the East and also based on the cult of a male sky god? Yes, you know it. Something to think about. I think one of the best ways to understand how the witch came to be regarded as a figure of evil is, of course, the examination of the various mythological figures. The actual mystical wise woman became a common archetype in many mythologies of the ancient world. Perhaps the best example of this perception of the wise woman, the witch, being the personification of the dark feminine side, is Lilith. Lilith is a figure from the Jewish mythology, said to be a promiscuous demon of the night who kidnaps children. Lilith was portrayed in some later accounts as leading poor Adam astray from his path of righteousness and purity, and leaving the Garden of Eden after she refuses to be subservient to him. Lilith was a figure to be feared, a woman with powers who used them to torment others. In all truth, she was the figure of the woman that has free thinking, which was highly condemned in such societies. And the stories of these societies are fueled with the male-centric religious notions, and of course, whatever practices women had, it was forbidden. The teachings of witchcraft were seen as dangerous and outlawed as pagan practices. For the Jewish people encountering societies that worshipped female gods, it was a way to establish their own religious dominance. To them, such societies were in the wrong and were a bunch of pagans practicing witchcraft. Greek mythology also features many female figures who practice magic, but their portrayal is not quite as fatal as that of the Jewish Lilith. Although in the Greek society, women didn't have a lot of power. In fact, they were quite submissive, as they lived in a male-dominated society. So do pay close attention to that. The Greeks were pagans, but not every pagan society treated their women the same way. It highly depends on the religious administration of the society that dictates how things should be conducted within the society itself. But for instance, instead of Lilith, the Greeks had Medea, an ancient Greek figure of a sorceress who helped Jason during his quest, providing him with spells, potions, and magic. Traditionally, Medea ends up happily married to Jason and they have children together. Medea plays the beneficial role of a helper, providing magic for the male hero, right? And in Greek myth, magic is a positive thing. Medea is a good account to understand the mind of ancient Greeks towards women and magic. Magic was good, women provided it, but women should know their place in the Greek society because they had the duty to help men and marry them and have babies. So you see, there was the acceptance of magic since the Greeks, well, they were a pagan society, but a warrior society as well, ruled by a male sky god, Zeus. So women weren't that free in the Greek society, as some neo-pagans try to pass on. Even in the Greek myths, the female figures, the goddesses, are subjugated to the will of the male god, father of all the gods. And if they don't do as Zeus says, they are in big trouble. Now, making a satire out of this, and if you are a woman, you won't probably find this funny and might as well just hang myself to avoid aggravation. But ancient Jewish society towards women was like, you can't practice magic and go to the kitchen and make me a sandwich. Ancient Greek society towards women, you can practice magic, but go to the kitchen and make me a sandwich. This mindset in ancient Greece, in the ancient Greek society, is precisely thanks to Indo-European religious beliefs in male sky gods and the contact with native European cultures whose religious beliefs were around the female figure and a role as priestess and provider of magic. With Indo-Europeans, the woman gained the place as the servant of man and provider of magic, spells, potions, divination, and so on. Wise women lost the role as figures who presided over the communities and conducted all sorts of religious ceremonies and rituals. This is why, in many societies or cultures to this day that preserved animistic concepts of the supernatural, therefore their spiritualities are much more shamanic in nature, in such societies, the great majority of cases, the shaman of the tribe or community is female, because such societies did not retain in their culture the religious notion of the cult of the male sky god or gods and preferred to keep the older forms of faith. Anyway, as the Greek society evolves and becomes even more focused on the male figure, so does the myth evolved and changed, greatly changed. In Odyssey, for instance, Circe, an enchantress who lived with her wild animals on the island of Aiaia, is portrayed as a dangerous woman who transforms Odysseus' men into pigs. She uses potions, casts magic with a wand, and even makes herself invisible. Odysseus defeats her because the male god Hermes gives him a magic root, which he uses against Circe. Circe swears an oath not to use any more magic against the hero, and then ends up as a servant feeding Odysseus' entire crew and even sleeps with the hero. See this here? In this version, the subjugation of the woman is intensified, and we start to see magic being forbidden, the very thing that still gave some power to women in the Greek society. So this is already a society trying to take away all the power women had left. The myths and legends aren't just stories, they reflect the mentality of a society and how that mentality was influenced by religion and subsequently influenced the entire way of life of that society. So the outcome of Circe is a happy one for the male hero, but not for the female figure. The powerful woman who tried to trick and fool man finally accepts her rightful place as a lover and homemaker. This Greek society would highly influence Rome, and Rome would come up with Christianity, which was a political construction to control the Roman province of Judea. Christianity based on both Roman and Jewish religious conceptions, and as said before, such religious conceptions did not see women and magic as something benevolent. And it was Rome that spread Christianity into Europe, later on leading to the persecution of witches conducted by the Catholic Church and the mass murders with Protestantism. A chain of events, horrible events. But continue on with the ancient Greek society, because indeed they had a lot of influence all over Europe, not just them, but through Rome itself, and their classical accounts in great part were the sources of great study conducted by the Christians, precisely to construct the basis of their own religion. In the ancient Greek society, the damaging portrayals of magical women who did not have control over their impulses was even more augmented with time. For instance, Lamia. Everybody loves this female demon. Lamia was in fact, or began as a beautiful queen, who somehow turned into a terrifying being who devours children. Does this remind you of Lilith? Yeah. Lamia is portrayed in some versions as a demonic woman with a serpent's tail below the waist. Just as Lilith was also linked to the serpent. And guess what? In some versions of the Garden of Eden story, the tempting serpent is portrayed as a woman. Please do watch my video about the serpent of paganism if you have the time, of course, obviously. The serpent was a powerful pagan symbol which started to be turned into a symbol of demonic power, a symbol of fear and witchcraft, precisely to be turned against the pagans themselves. In the Greek society, and later on across the European early Middle Ages, Lamia became a famous figure of great fear, one that mothers would often use to threaten their children with to encourage good behavior. So it is somewhat easy to see how tales of this frightening demonic woman could be spread into society and altered the perception of magic and what the women who practiced it were capable of. The Greeks themselves were not against magic, mind that. In fact, they had their own form of religious magic surrounding rituals to invoke the power of gods. What they were against were women who did not know their place in ancient Greek society. Ancient Greek women received death sentences for distributing bewitching drugs and uttering spells. The Greeks believed in magic and were so afraid of it that they campaigned to eradicate magic from society entirely. State-controlled magic was seen as acceptable, but magic in the hands of lower classes, especially poor women, was regarded as dangerous, and those who practiced it were in big trouble if caught. As Roman culture in great part was heavily influenced by Greek myth, these common perceptions of demonic beings and the good, obedient, motherly woman still held great influence. The Romans also openly acknowledged the use of magic. In fact, it became part of the society's state religion. But just like in Greece, in Rome the religion was controlled by the upper classes and was directly connected to Roman law. When the empire encountered new religions or cults that also possessed magical performances, or dealing with magic in general, this was seen as sacrilegious and dangerous to the balance of the patriarchal power in Rome. Magic was the only power women had left across Europe, outside the classical world. The Romans, just like the Greeks, hated powerful women. Even though both men and women practiced witchcraft, the persecution fell on women, either on the lower classes or in the new conquered provinces or foreigner to the empire. And so, with the Roman Empire, finally witchcraft was labeled black magic, and those who practiced it were condemned by Roman law. The practicing of burning witches occurred in Rome far before it became commonplace for Christians. This method in Rome started to be used also against those who practiced other religions, precisely to secure the religion of the state, or in other words, to secure the control and power the state had. You know what's funny in this? Well, funny in the most twisted and horrible way, obviously, but early Christians were occasionally accused of practicing black magic in ancient Rome, precisely because they had a different religion from that of the Roman state. And then Christians later on, who were nothing more than Romans, would continue to practice the same crimes that they themselves had been victims of. Christianity is a Roman invention, so they kept a lot of beliefs and laws and religious conceptions of the classical world. To finalize this video, I would like to talk a bit about a goddess that had great influence in ancient Rome, and I have noticed, it's curious, among neo-pagans, especially in England, this goddess is quite famous. I'm talking about Isis. Isis, the Egyptian goddess, of course, obviously. The cult of Isis was incredibly powerful in ancient Rome, and it actually threatened to extinguish the early vestiges of Christianity. Isis wasn't just worshipped in Egypt and Rome itself, but throughout the Roman Empire. This female goddess was not only presented as a perfect mother and wife, but also a goddess of magic. In the Roman Empire, her cult became a well-structured religion, and it developed side by side with Christianity. It's actually even quite possible that the image of Isis being this heavenly mother who has a son who is a prophesied son of kings might indeed have influenced early Christianity. But the worship of Isis and Christianity, two religions simply not compatible, sooner or later one religion would have to erase the other. And given the previous explanations and the Roman mentality towards women of power, a goddess whose power was growing was quite dangerous, and so to the Romans it was preferable to stick with a religion focused on the worship of a male sky god, Christianity. Isis and her magic were regarded as evil pagan beliefs. Thus Christianity spread, and the cult of Isis and the worship of any other pagan deities was outlawed. Christianity developed over the years. Witchcraft was seen as a running counter to religion, classified as to be associated with the devil, and in fact witchcraft simply did not exist in the minds of Christians, early Christians, to the point that it was classified as superstition, and as such anyone who practiced witchcraft was seen as delusional due to being deceived by the devil and could and should be executed. The Bible itself states, and I quote, "Anyone who casts spells or is a medium or spiritist or who consults the dead is detestable by the Lord, and do not allow a sorceress to live." Christianity was establishing itself on a society still with many pagan cults and religions. Christianity was in direct opposition to almost all the religions around it, and such religions believed witchcraft was an essential part of many of the religious performances. So Christianity took on the role to execute everyone around them, because Christians firmly believed that witchcraft was superstition, and because all the other religions were seen as obviously political parties in direct competition with Christianity itself. Just like the Greeks, Hebrews, and the Romans before them, Christians used magic and witchcraft as a scapegoat and a way of demonizing all those who were different and did not wish to become Christians, all those who kept the old faiths of their ancestors. As Europe enters in the Middle Ages, well, you know how it was like concerning witch trials and executions. It escalated over the years, and it was especially terrible with Protestantism, already in the 16th century, of course, modern age. The views against witchcraft and those who practiced magic were a response to religions spreading and encountering mysterious belief systems that ran in opposition to their own. The depictions in myth we have seen previously were idealized images of how society, and especially women, should behave. Everything was political. So, in conclusion, we start to see the degradation of the figure of the wise woman when Indo-Europeans spread into old Europe and brought their sky gods and their male-dominated culture. This highly influenced many ancient societies, including the Greeks and subsequently the Roman society. But the classical societies and their hate for powerful women that threatened to bring down the patriarchal dominance of the state was augmented with the contact with Jewish traditions, Hebrew to be more precise, that in their myths and religious conceptions made sure to take out the power of women, as they were also a patriarchal culture relying on the power of a male sky god. Jewish tradition and the Roman tradition made a very twisted cocktail called early Christianity, which would spread all over Europe, fomenting even more the degradation of the figure of the wise woman, leading to persecution and mass murders of thousands of women, and also men and children, accused of practicing witchcraft, because in all honesty, their old pagan ways were a threat to the political and religious power of the elite. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Listen, if you have been around this channel for some time, what I'm about to say next, you know I'm not bragging about my own work. But I think a great part of the content of this video will be quite useful not only for men in general, but for pagans, both men and women. You all know my tenacious and fervent criticism towards Christianity, but sometimes we have to put such things aside and accept the facts, the historical truth. Christianity indeed caused a lot of horrors, and it was terrible for pagans and non-pagans. But Christianity didn't spontaneously appear and started killing people at random. Everything, every belief, myth, legend, concept, idea, etc. has its origins in some point in time. And the truth is, not everything in ancient pagan societies was good, benevolent, dances in the forest, rainbows and orgies. And I am, by all definitions, a pagan. But we must take into consideration that pagans, just like Christians or any other religious group, were and are humans. And humans are easily influenced by those who subjugate them to their laws, politics, religions, etc. So the true problem in here is the religions we blindly follow without questioning why they exist in the first place. So, if you find this video useful, please do share it with those you think should listen to the content of this video, obviously. And thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. Happy Samhain and Halloween. And please, go on, children of the wilds, do go out there and run into the night and howl at the moon. Enjoy this time of the year. Tack för idag.